sip of my beer. By the way, this is a really good IPA.
I mean, I feel like, to be fair, you having a beer is a pretty normal occurrence. Okay, you didn't have to maybe be quite that obnoxious.
You didn't have to call me an alcoholic in front
I
of everyone.
did.
Hello, welcome to Movie Break. My name's JP.
My name's Kristen, and to start us out, we know this is our first episode on the YouTube channel, and we ultimately decided to start this YouTube channel together because it probably goes without saying that we both really like movies, we like talking about movies, and we thought that by doing this on a wider scale and actually showcasing these on the internet as opposed to just having these kind of conversations privately, that we would also be able to kind of tap into what is the endless and vast world of the internet and get others' feedbacks. So yeah, in short, that is what brought us into creating Movie Break.
Well said. So for our first episode and for our first season of this series, what we're going to be doing is talking about a small filmmaker that is near and dear to both of our hearts. His name is Derek Cianfrance. Kristen, why don't you talk a little bit about Derek Cianfrance as far as like a filmmaker? Why do you think we chose him to do as our subject matter for the first season?
Yeah, I think Derek Cianfrance is surprisingly a not super well-known director. I feel like there are some big names that we definitely hear thrown out for directors, and he's often not included on that list for whatever reason. But he's got a really great body of work that has interested me for a long time. Today and specifically we'll be talking more about Blue Valentine, but also he came out with this great series recently, I Know This Much Is True. The book is great as well. And yeah, I mean, the way that he's really, I think, able to tap into emotion and just kind of the depths that his characters go to is just really incredible and really just real to watch.
Yeah. He's probably responsible for making my favorite movie of all time. Probably responsible for making one of your favorite movies of all time. We won't spoil that yet, which one's which. But overall, he reminds me of kind of that classical, like, 70s filmmaker. Him and Steve McQueen, both, current filmmakers that I think really kind of tap into that kind of Scorsese, Coppola era of, like, 70s auteur filmmaking that really interesting. And watching a Derek Cianfrance movie, what sticks out to me first is the acting of just how kind of raw and real everything is, and how much you're almost entranced by his characters and everyone. What draws me to him as well is almost like you're watching through a window into your neighbor's life. It's just kind of these very working class people and kind of going through drama.
Yeah, I would say a lot of his movies and his work, you sort of feel like you're seeing a scene you're not really supposed to see. And there are some moments, in watching a lot of his work that kind of almost makes you feel uncomfortable, because there is just that like acute sense of, I'm not really supposed to be here in this moment. This is strange for me to be here. It's inappropriate for me to be here. And that is pervasive throughout a lot of his work.
So the first movie we're going to be talking about in this episode is not Derek's first movie. He made a movie called Brothers Tide that has not been formally released in any way. I would love to see that movie. He made that when he was in film school, so I would be really interested to see what that movie would be like. But what we're going to be talking about today came out 10 years after that. It's a small movie that you and I can safely say is one of our favorite movies. It's called Blue Valentine. I feel like when the movie came out, it was getting a lot of critical acclaim, specifically with Michelle Williams' performance. I know she was nominated for an Oscar for that. But just really a powerful movie. Kristen, this is one of your favorite movies of all time. I'll kind of let you speak a bit about how much you like this movie so much. Why do you think you like this movie so much, I guess?
I think it just really showcases the kind of the buildup of a relationship and kind of the disintegration of a marriage, as you watch. I mean, it is just so intimate in a way that, you know, kind of harkens back to what I said before about that sense of feeling uncomfortable and feeling like you're almost in something that you're not supposed to see. But I think that the connection that is established between Michelle Williams' character and Ryan Gosling's character comes across as, you know, extremely genuine, extremely real, and also, you know, you feel attached to these characters, and their struggle feels very hurtful, I think, as the audience. And as it goes throughout, it just, you know, it feels like a couple that you could know, as opposed to just actors on a screen pretending to be a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah. What
Absolutely.
about you? What do you find as the, you know, what do you find so enjoyable about this movie?
I don't know if I want to say enjoyable. I mean, at least half the
Might be the
movie's
wrong
enjoyable. Like I'm surprised it works so well, because it really does feel like you're watching two movies at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And what it's really surprising is tonally how both of them work together. Because one moment you're grinning like, wow, like I'm watching a real life couple fall in love, and this is so romantic, and you're literally watching two of the best actors of their generation falling in love. And these like very kind of classical tropes are done very new wavy that I think are is beautiful to watch, and it's really enchanting to kind of watch the two of them, Ryan Gosling and Michelle Williams, act together in that circumstance. It's so engaging and so real, you know.
Yeah.
And then the antithesis of that is to watch them falling out of love. For those who don't know, Blue Valentine is basically the start of a relationship and then the end of a relationship.
That being said, I do think that, you know, spoilers, we already kind of went there, but I do think the end is fairly open-ended, where you can kind of come to your own conclusion in terms of where their marriage went after this.
Do you have a favorite part of the movie? Do you enjoy the beginning of them falling in love more than the kind of the harsh reality of them kind of their marriage kind of crumbling and falling apart?
I don't think I could really necessarily choose between those aspects. I think that they're both really great for different reasons. Obviously, I think that, you know, seeing the establishment of their relationship feels very genuine and optimistic, versus, of course, the kind of disintegration of their marriage feels very painful and cynical. But I don't think it's necessarily that I feel more strongly towards one side of them than another. I think that, if anything, like, the establishment, though, of the positives to their relationship helped me really connect with them as they're falling apart, because it was like, oh, it used to be so good, and we can see that.
Yeah. I almost want to just watch, anytime I'm watching the movie, I'm like, ugh, can we just watch them fall in love and then the movie end there, you know? Like I would love to watch a cut of that. But to get back to the editing too, like I'm so impressed with how it works of being able to, you know, get a very kind of sweet, sensitive moment of them, like, you know, kind of, you know, the first time of them, you know, kind of falling in love and just hanging out for the first time, and then super cut that with, you know, them having like a really depressing argument about their future and their relationship and what they're going to be doing moving forward. You know, Michelle Williams challenging Ryan Gosling's character about, you know, what he wants to do with his life. I don't know. It's very, very sad, but very, very like you understandable. Like, you know, I think maybe when I was younger, I kind of sided with one character over the other, but now watching it, you know, I kind of have sympathy and empathy for both of them. You know, I see Dean's point of view, of like, hey, you know, I'm happy with you, and kind of I want to continue where we are now, versus Cindy's version of like, hey, we need to keep growing and we need to like continue to, grow as people, don't you want something more than just being a house painter? You know, like I'm on track to be, you know, in the medical field. And
Who did you side with?
I won't spoil. I won't get into that. But yes, I did side with one person over the other. But I appreciate too the especially in the beginning, kind of the showing of like Michelle Williams' character about how she's like kind of annoyed with Ryan Gosling's character, just like these slow little things in the beginning of like him acting like a little baby in the beginning with the kid, you know, and not being like responsible, and she's having to kind of take care of both of them. She's clearly always trying to distract herself, and she doesn't want to be around Ryan Gosling a lot, like as far as like on a one-to-one personal thing.
Right.
You know, she's always kind of keeping herself busy with either like cleaning, and that could just be because the house is dirty and she needs to clean, but I kind of took it more as she's just trying to distract herself from having to be just sitting down with him, because I think it's probably depressing to her of like where they ended up.
Right. I think it's probably very jarring to her to be around him, because then it really hits her of like, I used to really be like deeply in love with this person, and I don't even like him anymore. And I think that would be just, that realization would be really hard. But to your point before, in terms of the aspect of like wanting to side with one character or the other, I do think that kind of just goes to show how great of a movie this is, and how well acted, how well written it is that I genuinely don't think there's either of them that is bad or good. You know, there are aspects of both of them that are very positive, as well as they both, of course, have their own flaws. And I think sometimes in a lot of movies like this, it kind of veers one way or the other of like, you really want to side strongly with one character over the other. But I think in Blue Valentine, there are aspects of both of them that are incredibly likable, and aspects that are not so likable, to put it mildly.
Did you side with one character over the other, or?
I don't know if I ever necessarily sided with one character over the other. I think I relate more to one character over the other to some extent, but I don't know if I necessarily felt like, oh, only this character is right, because I think that neither of them is really wrong. And that, I think, is kind of the hardest part about their marriage falling apart, is that neither of them is necessarily wrong so much as it's just maybe they're not right for each other.
So Kristen, what do you think this movie has that maybe is better, or is anyway an improvement of other kind of romantic dramas, kind of the same cloak?
I think one thing that I feel like separates it from a lot of other romantic dramas is I do think that the establishment of their relationship and what drew them together is incredibly strong, versus I have watched some romantic dramas that like, I just watch it and they're falling apart and I'm just kind of like, I don't really give a shit. Like, I just don't feel it for them, versus I feel like this movie, I mean, I've watched this movie so many times, and almost every time I've watched it, it has made me cry. It doesn't really matter what place I'm at in my life, what is going on. It's pretty surefire, I'm probably gonna cry. And I think that is one of the things that separates it most from other movies of this kind of same genre, is just because there's such a genuine care you have for these characters, and you just want so badly for them to be able to work it out, all the while knowing that most likely they probably can't.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, to get back to Derek Cianfrance, a common theme in all of his movies is family, and like the significance of family, and what lineage means. And so with this movie in particular too, it's the mother and father, you know, kind of family, and it's really, you know, it's to how beautiful I think the falling in love aspect is. It's almost a nightmare of like kind of watching them disintegrate, and I think it was a really good idea too to have it like during a holiday. I think like 4th of July and like having it set during a specific holiday adds to the realness and kind of like relatability. And you know, personally, my parents aren't divorced. I know yours aren't either, but I could only imagine like being a child of divorce watching this and like how real it would be to kind of watch that and to kind of feel almost helpless watching it and kind of watching their just relationship crumble, because you really root for them, and that's what you were saying, the likability of them is like you really want them to be together. Ryan Gosling is literally James Dean in this movie. He's so like charismatic and likable and such a, you know, just you can't stop looking at him. And Michelle Williams is the exact same way. She is just so like the way she carries herself is with like she lacks confidence but is very confident at the same time, and like this kind of very rare a thing that I've never seen another actress kind of show on screen before.
They're both very down-to-earth characters. Like, they're both characters that, you know, some movies you watch and it's like, you know, set in some uppity part of New York City and everyone's wealthy and everyone's a trust fund kid, and it's kind of, you have this feeling while you're watching it of like, these people could not be real, or if they are real, I don't really like them very much. Versus I feel like these characters, you watch them and they feel like they could be real people, and that just really adds to the care that you have for them and the feelings you have towards them, is that they seem like, you know, anyone else that you could meet, and anyone else of course has their own story that you never necessarily know about.
Yeah. And what's even equally as heartbreaking too is to mention the family thing again, is that they're kind of repeating cycles that their parents lived through as well, right? Like, you know, Ryan Gosling, you know, talking about how his mother left him when he was young, and so his dad kind of had to raise him, and you actually get to see Michelle Williams, her family, and kind of going through a lot of similar things that she ends up going through with her kind of father and mother not having a healthy relationship. What do you think happened to the mom, by the way? Because they never show her again. Is it assumed that they divorced and they're not together anymore? Because you just never see the mom again.
Didn't necessarily assume that they divorced. I honestly felt like maybe she had passed away, more likely than that they divorced. And I say that just because I felt like they had been together for so long, and I felt like she had been with him through so much that maybe she had kind of internalized this idea of like divorce was wrong, or that I shouldn't get divorced from him, or, you know, it's not that it's okay that he was doing those things, but just that I think I felt like she was resigned to it, I guess. Michelle Williams' character's mom, you know, I just felt like she was in a place where it was like, this is how it is and I can't change it. Yeah. What do you think? Did you?
I always
she left him.
I always took it as they got a divorce. Personally, I think, you know, but that adds to either if she passed away or if she got divorced. I think that feeds into the character of Michelle Williams, because her whole thing is she doesn't want to get stuck in that same relationship of like kind of a, you know, loveless marriage of them, you know, of like, you know, a guy yelling all the time about, you know, you didn't make the food correctly. But, you know, sadly they kind of get in a, you know, a similar thing of
Yeah. I think that brings an interesting point though to think about. If they did get divorced and she, you know, ended the marriage with him, is why does Michelle Williams side with the dad? Because we never see the mom again at all in the movie, so why would she necessarily trust her daughter to be around him, but we never see her mom again? So that's an interesting component, because my sense is that she, not that she loved her dad more than she loved her mom, but it was almost like she felt more connected with him in some way. And I'm wondering if that is the implication, that if her mom finally did divorce him and she still only had anything to do with the dad after that, of Why did she do that?
Because it's not too far along, right? Like, how old is their daughter? Probably like 5 or 6. Like, she can't be that old, so it's only a 5 or 6 years difference. So, it can't be that far into the future. So, I just like the mom isn't that old. At least she didn't seem that old. So, her passing away. I guess I never thought of it that way. It's interesting that you thought she had passed away. I just always assumed that either they got a divorce or she left or something.
Maybe I never thought of it that deeply, or maybe I had just never thought like she had gotten to a place that she was ready to. But if she did divorce him, his character deserved it. He was kind of the worst.
So comparing this to his other work, we haven't rewatched any of his other work yet, so this is the first one, so we're going to be watching the other ones. But just kind of from remembrance of his other films and his miniseries he did, what is your kind of takeaway, I guess, from this movie?
Maybe this is really like simplistic and dense, but just like don't marry an asshole. Like, not that is all that it takes to sustain a marriage or to sustain a relationship. Like, obviously there's.
Are they an asshole? Well, who's the asshole? Is Dean an asshole?
No, I more took that away from like the aspect of like Michelle Williams' parents' relationship. Like, don't marry an asshole in terms of that. Like, I do think there's still hope for their relationship to work, for Cindy and Dean's relationship to work.
I'll ask you 2 questions. Do you think they stay together, and do you think they should stay together?
Do I think they did stay together? Probably not. There were a lot of reasons not to stay together. There were also a lot of reasons to stay together, but I do think that sometimes I'm not sure if love, just the love that you once had, can outweigh all of those other reasons, or that can't fully sustain your present relationship is the love you once had. In terms of if they should have stayed together, what kind of loaded question is that? Is there a right way to answer that? I think that yes and no, like everything in life, right? There are consequences for any action. So, I mean, ultimately, there were a lot of reasons for them to stay together, also a lot of reasons for them to be apart. I don't think that there's any black and white answer to that question.
I think what's heartbreaking is that you see how charming both of them are, and how
well suited they actually are for each other in a lot of ways.
Yeah. How they truly make each other better too, and how like they're a perfect match, at least in the beginning, right? Like, and that's I think that's how a lot of relationships start, right? Is like you think that you're a perfect match, and then with years of either stress and a mortgage
and
resentment and a child to bear, that can kind of eat at why you fell in love with someone in the first place, and maybe have you forget why you fell in love with someone. I wouldn't recommend watching this as a couple unless you've been together for about 6 months.
Maybe more.
Maybe
if you feel pretty like steady in your relationship at that time.
Don't. If you've
you're
had
on the rocks, it's not.
If you've had a fight in the last month, don't watch this movie. Because generally, like it's like I think this, as well as the final fight in Before Midnight. I think those are like some of the realest couple fights I've ever seen on film, and it's really it's hard to watch. Especially shown in conjunction with the first half. It's really hard to watch.
How do you think they go from, like, as I watch it, I notice that all of the things that they once loved about the other person they kind of grow to hate. Like, I feel like, for example, like Cindy, grows to kind of hate Dean's, like, how spontaneous he is and how like fun-loving he is, and the spin on that has become like he's lazy and unambitious. And then on the other side of that, I feel like Dean, kind of fell in love with like Cindy's ambition and how witty she is and all of those things, and that becomes, like, for lack of a better term, like a noose around his neck later of like, you're not just you're pushing me towards a future I don't want. Like in that conversation of like, why are you just a house painter? And all of that. And it feels very, I think, confrontational to him. But I guess I'm curious your thoughts on just how it went from being like, I really love these things about this other person to like, I hate this about them.
I mean, it's a cliche, right? But I think in a lot of ways people are drawn to their opposites, right? So like, that it is a cliche, but sometimes the reason you fall in love with someone is the reason sometimes you kind of grow to resent them. But because the reason you fall in love with that person, I think, is because it's a different side that you're not used to. So, with Cindy, she's used to kind of being very structured in her things. She's going to school, she takes care of her grandma, and she goes home, and that's really about it. And then she kind of meets this spontaneous guy who's very fun-loving, and he's a musician, and he is not from the city, but they kind of have a lot in common, and they just kind of,
he has no interest in education, and she wants to be a doctor.
Exactly. I think it's almost, and to Dean the same way, where he, I don't want to say he's a loser, but he just doesn't really know what he's doing in life, and he doesn't really have like a goal. He's just kind of there to live life, and he just so happens to fall in love with someone who's the exact opposite of him, where they're very structured and very they want to live life a certain way that he is not used to. And I think what the message I kind of get is that sometimes meeting in the middle is not healthy. I think kind of if you meet in the middle as a couple, no one is really happy, right? Because I think Dean's not happy because I think he feels a lot of resentment because he's not living up to like what a man in a relationship should do, right? Like he should be more wanting to like find a better career and be a provider, where he's maybe resenting her because she is not being as spontaneous and fun and loving as he is, and like he wants to have this kind of very, he's a romantic at heart, so he's like trying to be fun and wanting to just live life to the fullest, and she's the exact opposite of that. So I think meeting halfway in a relationship is probably not healthy sometimes. And at least in the example that they're showing in this movie.
So what if meeting in the middle isn't necessarily healthy? And I feel like I grasp what you're saying of it's not necessarily healthy when it comes to like huge fundamental aspects of your personality. But I feel like at the same point, like at least negotiation on small things is just necessary to sustaining a relationship. But I feel like what I'm gathering from what you're saying is that it becomes like a potential for resentment when it is about like major fundamental aspects of your personality or your values.
Well, it's kind of like Gone Girl, right? Like the whole idea of that, right, is that they are basically, it's a facade. They're pretending to be people that they're not. And then when they find out who the other person really is in the marriage, it's almost like getting the rug pulled out from under you, right? And so in the same way, it's like that, where it's like they worked in that specific time in their life of kind of being like star-crossed lovers, and like this kind of very young romantic point of view. That worked great for them because they were able to, I think, be spontaneous and to be romantic, where when they were being forced to have to be parents, and it takes couples years to decide whether they want to have a kid or not, and they're dating for we're soon probably a month or two, right? Yeah. And then it's shown that she's pregnant, and so they're forced into being parents now, and they don't really know each other that well, so they don't know how
they don't really know long term like how this is really going to go. And I do think in actuality, like if they hadn't been, if their relationship hadn't just been like hastened so much by this like unexpected pregnancy like it was, then would they have really have gotten married? I question that a bit. Like I've wondered in watching it, like if they if there'd never been this pregnancy and they had just like dated for like a couple of years, would they have called it quits? My gut says yes, because what they wanted was so fundamentally different that I feel like at that point they would have kind of grown apart, especially if, for example, like Cindy had really pursued medical school, right, to be a doctor, and Dean, you know, remained like a mover. I don't know, it just seems like those worlds would have really not clicked.
Mm-hmm.
Because then she's becoming this kind of career woman, so to speak, and he's kind of staying in this like, you know, relatively like unskilled physical labor kind of job. And I think that at that point there would have been a lot of conflict about that, and I think that conflict would have come then, as opposed to, okay, let's be a family, okay, we're gonna make this work somehow even though we don't know each other hardly at all.
Yeah.
And then it just slowly kind of falls apart during the years.
Well, that's what I was talking about with them trying to meet halfway in the middle, right? Like, no one's happy by the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's not happy because she feels like he's not being serious enough, and he thinks that she's being like kind of stuck up and like not embracing life to the fullest, and they're, you know, arguing about how to raise the kid, and they're arguing about you know, just how to live life, like, you know, and they can't even be romantic anymore by the end, because they can't even decide how to like be intimate with each other. You like they're fighting even over about that, and you know.
Then what are you advocating for in that case? Like, you're saying that, I guess you're advocating for there shouldn't have to be that much compromise. Like, you guys should be more similar on a value standpoint than that.
I'm not even making an argument that there should be anything. I think it's just I think I'm trying to rationalize in my head, because to answer the question that was posed earlier, I don't think they should be together, and I really I don't, and I don't think
further.
I don't think they should be together, and I don't think they end up being together. And the reason is for what we were just talking about. I don't think that I think they were drawn to each other at a certain time in their life, and they needed each other at that time, and then just like a lot of relationships happen, unfortunately, sometimes. You know, people kind of grow apart, and your differences that you were attracted to at that person becomes the reason why you don't want to be with that person.
I just find it interesting that you're just so definitively like, no, they should not be together. And I feel like that's not necessarily maybe an answer I would have gotten from you. Like that's the thing that's like so cool about this movie.
Well, it's because I'm a romantic at heart.
I feel like what's interesting about this movie is I feel like the answer to that question for me would have changed depending on like all kinds of a zillion factors.
5 years, 5 years ago, younger romantic JP. I would have said no, they have to stay together, because you get seduced almost by like their before stage, and like they're like, wow, they're so charismatic together and they're so beautiful, and you relate to their relationship, either if you've had a relationship like that where you fall head over heels with someone, and so you relate to that, and then you see the crumbling in it, and it leaves a poor taste in your mouth, and you don't want it to be there. But it makes perfect sense, especially, you know, if you kind of meet couples who have either been separated or divorced. It makes a lot of sense. Like, Dean and Cindy were not going to make it, truly. You know, whether she got pregnant or whether she didn't get pregnant, I don't think they would have made it.
I'm just so interested in this conversation, because I wasn't expecting that answer from you of just a definitive no. Yeah. I was expecting there to at least be a little bit of hedging, like I did, of like, which I still stand by that answer, to be fair. Like, I still think it's like a should they be together? I don't know. Shoulds are, what even are shoulds, right? But like, I think that it's a factor of pros and cons, for lack of a better way to think about it.
I'll say if they can go to couples therapy and if they can work it out. But
can you imagine being their couple therapist? That poor person.
Yeah, that would be really hard.
No, I would just be like, all right, ended. I'm good. I'm done.
But no, I don't think they should be together. But if you've ever met a couple that have been divorced, I just see the movie in my head. Like if I watch it, I'm just like, Dean's kind of the loser ex-husband, right, who like comes to like he gets her on like every other weekend, right?
Yeah.
And he starts maybe dating a cocktail waitress or something. And then because Cindy's so a career person and wants to have success, and Dean, that's not what he's interested in.
Yeah.
And for something that's so important to her and not important to him, it was never going to work.
Right, and I think, to be clear, I don't think there's anything wrong with either of those paths. Like, I think it is okay to be more like Dean. I think it's okay to be more like Cindy. I think it's also possible to kind of be in the middle of those spectrums, but I do think that they are just wildly apart from each other in those ways that it probably was always destined for conflict because of that, because they were really never, I don't think either of them was ever going to be willing to meet in the middle about that, whether you feel like they should or not. I don't think they were necessarily willing to compromise on those things. In some ways I think Dean is a little bit more willing to compromise in some ways than Cindy, at least by the end. I think that's kind of a desperation plea in a lot of ways, but at the same point, I don't think either of them was really committed to being different than who they were. And to be fair, it's not right to ask your partner to be different than who they are.
Yeah. So when you think about Blue Valentine, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
It's the first thing that pops into my head, like a feeling.
The feeling. Is it a certain type of filmmaking? Is it the acting? Is it a scene? Like, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Because Derek Cianfrance, I don't think, like, as far as filmmaking's concerned, there's not like you could point to like, oh, this is a Derek Cianfrance movie. I think the only thing I could say is like it's bleeding emotion.
I think it's more.
And that's
like,
what I think.
Yeah, I think it's more like the feeling it evokes than it is anything else. I think it's just provokes this really intense feeling of loss, almost this sense of, oh, that really hurts, and like I can envision that this really happened and this really hurt for this couple. And if I were in either of their shoes, I would feel distinctly similar in a lot of ways to, I think, how they feel. Yeah. But I want to go back a little bit to one thing that you kind of dodged answering
earlier. Go ahead. Ask away.
For the record. But you didn't want to, you kind of hedged around the idea of like, which one did I side with more? And I have kind of a sense of who I feel like you sided with more at certain points, but I'm curious to hear that.
Yeah, so, I think this movie came out in 2010. I probably watched it around 2011 or so. That was kind of when the Oscar campaign kind of came around. So I was 17 probably when I watched it. And so, I related to Dean, and I kind of like, I thought, what's the matter with Cindy? This guy like clearly loves her, and he's willing to do anything for her and willing to just make her happy. And in a lot of like kind of the intimate scenes that are really hard to watch at points, you can tell that like he genuinely just wants a kind of human connection with her and wants to be intimate with her in a passionate, like, loving way, and she rejects him. And I thought that was really harsh and really kind of hard to watch, and I had more sympathy for him. And I still do, but I also, as an...
Really? You still find yourself having a little bit more...
Not more. I see 50-50. I look at the situation in this movie now, where I can see both sides, and I side with both sides. I see both, and that's why I'm like, they don't need to be together, because they don't need to be together. Because I see both sides, and I see like what Cindy needs out of a relationship is not what Dean needs out of a relationship. I think Dean needs a lot of like validation and needs a lot of emotional connection, and Cindy's not the type of person that is going to give that. And in the same way, Cindy, I think, wants someone who is going to be interested and kind of always getting better and always kind of moving forward. and Dean's not that guy. He's not going to be that guy. You can't you can't shove a circle into a square, right? They are who they are. People are who they are, and they knew who they were when they met them, and they thought, I don't know if they thought that they could change them, but they thought that they could maybe live with those differences, but
I think there's a sense there when you first fall in love with a person, especially in their case, because things were just moved really quickly. I think there's that kind of sense of like the love we feel for each other can overcome all. And that's, I think, true to an extent, but I think that's also true more in cases of our values are more the same. We have kind of an actual foundation to our relationship, and we know who the other person truly is before we are committing forever to them, versus they kind of did all that in reverse. It was just like, we love each other, we have this like really intense like kind of physical connection and emotional too, but just we haven't really seen what this looks like on a day-to-day basis. And I think that life is different than that. Life is boring and monotonous a lot of the time, and they haven't been through those times together before they're already married and have a child.
And that's why I think the movie's so genius, because even though I see how their relationship is when they fall in love, and like how you truly want them to stay together. Hello, welcome from the future. So unfortunately, it took our first video to already make a boo-boo. Unfortunately, our master file that we recorded this conversation was corrupted, so literally the last 2 minutes of us wrapping up, unfortunately, is corrupted, so we were not able to edit that. So we decided to come on camera here and just kind of close out our conversation. Kristen?
Yeah. Same as JP said, basically we somehow managed already in our first episode to somehow really screw it up.
We're 1 for 1.
Yeah, I'm not sure how we managed to screw up just the last few minutes, but because of that, we figured we'd just do a quick wrap up instead. So in short, thank you for watching Movie Break. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to our views about this movie. And if you have any feedback for us, feel free to leave that in the comments. And then otherwise, we will see you guys again when we cover The Place Beyond the Pines next. Thanks.
Ciao.